It's Monday, and that so happens to be the day that I like to talk about monsters. I'm Jeff Arbuckle, and this is Monster Mondays, presented to you by Film Seizure. This week, I'm going to kind of travel back to the idea of H.G. Wells' The Invisible Man, but this time with the 2000 movie Hollow Man, which was directed by Paul Verhoeven. Verhoeven is somebody that we know quite a bit about in these parts. For example, on the actual Film Seizure podcast show, we have covered a handful of his movies: RoboCop, Total Recall, Basic Instinct. I'm sure at some point in time we will cover Starship Troopers as well. But I've also covered his 1995 bomb, Showgirls, on my website, B-Movie Enema. So, we know a thing or two about Mr. Verhoeven in these parts. But let's talk a little bit about him. He's very good at what I would say is a little bit more of a deconstruction kind of idea, right? With RoboCop, he's he kind of helps deconstruct the whole idea of capitalism run amok and how it is used to essentially police people in the future. There's a lot of little things that he likes to do in that movie in particular that really kind of paints this very dystopian world where consumerism is quite powerful, I guess you could say. With Basic Instinct, which is what was the first of two movies that he did with Joe Esterhaus, it kind of deconstructs the idea of the sexy and dangerous, right? The idea of how sexy a dangerous person can be, and how sex and danger can often intertwine. He deconstructs some of the spy genre with the sci-fi genre in Total Recall. Showgirls, I think, which was the second movie he did with Joe Esterhaus, was kind of meant to be a deconstruction of the glamorous lifestyle of being a famous Vegas showgirl, but that really did not work out too well for them. Of course, Starship Troopers, which was the movie he did before Hollow Man, after Showgirls, but before Hollow Man, was a take on jingoism and overzealous patriotism in the face of a war situation, and really kind of paints what could very well be the bad guys in a favorable light, if you will. But with Hollow Man, he's now kind of deconstructing the whole idea of the Invisible Man, which we'll talk a little bit more about later when I get to my three likes. Of course, inspired by H.G. Wells' Invisible Man, it performed quite well at the box office. It was a late summer of 2000 release, which sometimes when you release a movie in August like that, it can have a little bit more legs than the movies that come out in June and July, because as you get into the later part of the summer and into September, you start having a little bit more opportunity to really kind of outperform some of the not so great movies that are dumped out in August and September by the Hollywood system. But it did not do very well as far as the reviews. It's a little bit thin in the plot, which is what was a big detractor from critics like Roger Ebert, who kind of complained that we've seen the Invisible Man go crazy. Let's see him do a little bit more with that, which I think is one of the reasons why the 2020 version of the Invisible Man did so well, was because it's not that same kind of, he's gone invisible, therefore now he's unstable. It kind of took a different turn with that type of character. But the acting from a really good cast was also kind of hit on a little bit, that it was a little bit stilted or a little bit stunted by being just kind of a not so great plot, so kind of trapping them in these roles. But we'll talk a little bit about the things I actually do like about this. But the two primary actors in this are Elizabeth Shue and Kevin Bacon. In fact, Elizabeth Shue actually gets top billing, probably because she was in a slightly different place in her career than Kevin Bacon was at that time. Plus, Kevin Bacon's not seen for very much of this movie. And Elizabeth Shue's kind of the hero of the movie. But Kevin Bacon, of course, he kind of launched out of a cannon in his career in the early 80s. He was in the first Friday the 13th movie. He has one of the more memorable deaths in the Friday the 13th series by getting the arrow through the throat. He then was in Diner before going into Footloose, Quicksilver, Tremors, Flatliners, which really kind of established him as one of the bigger young stars of the 80s and the early part of the 90s. But he was also in a couple of really big time, well-liked and well-appreciated movies like JFK, A Few Good Men, and Apollo 13. And in 1999, he was in a supernatural horror movie that was called Stir of Echoes. And while that did not perform all that well at the box office, it was a pretty big hit once it got onto VHS and into cable lineups. And from that, it really kind of proved that he might have something a little bit more in terms of his acting ability. He was actually praised for his acting ability in Stir of Echoes. And that probably was what he was really kind of riding going into 2000 to be in Hollow Man. Meanwhile, Elizabeth Shue had a kind of an opposite career trajectory, sort of. A lot of her movies that were made prior to 1995, she was kind of the sweet girl next door type of character. She was the girlfriend in a couple of the Back to the Future movies. She was the babysitter that all of the guys my age would have loved to have had as their babysitter. Very cute, very likable, very lovable, but also very capable. And she was just kind of that girl next door. She was the girlfriend character in a lot of movies. Well, in 1995, she was in a movie called Leaving Las Vegas, and this movie that I am lobbying to talk about on the Film Seizure show, but as of the time I'm recording this, I'm not entirely sure if I'm getting there or not, but she was nominated for an Academy Award for that, and she played the hooker with a heart of gold, Sarah. And she then started kind of getting a little bit more adult roles, a little bit more mature. She was in a kind of a stylish and sort of sexy thriller with Woody Harrelson called Palmetto. She was in a Woody Allen movie. This role that she's in this movie has a little bit of sexual charm to it. She is kind of transitioning at this point out of that girlfriend role and more into a woman, really kind of playing mature women, not mature in age, but I mean mature in the fact that she could be a little spicier, she could be a little sexier, and kind of get away from just being the girl next door that she had been in those movies that she had kind of made her name on before 1995. But I've talked enough about the director, the two stars. Let's actually talk about the movie now. Bacon plays a guy named Sebastian Cain, And he is kind of an arrogant scientist. Elizabeth Shue is his ex-girlfriend, Linda. And they are part of a team who is working for the U.S. government and the U.S. military in particular. Kane has created a serum that turns a subject invisible. And there are some animals that they've tested this on in their lab that they have not yet tested on, so you can see them. And then there are some of the kennels and cages where they have. Now, the only problem is that he has yet to create the serum that will bring somebody back from being invisible. And also, much as the case with the usual Invisible Man story, those that they have tested it on, the longer they're invisible, the less stable they are mentally. So there's a gorilla there that is starting to become more and more aggressive as they continue to try to find the serum to bring her back. We see that it's late one night and Sebastian's working on the serum that will act as the antidote to being invisible. We see that he has voyeuristic tendencies with a neighbor that lives across the street from him. She's a very attractive woman, and she always comes in, and the very first thing she does is take off her top. And I think she normally takes a shower after she gets home or whatever before bed. And he's constantly trying to catch a peek of what she looks like under all of her clothes. And that plays a really important part because later he does discover the serum that will bring people or bring the subject back from being invisible. After it gets a little bit hairy with the gorilla, whether or not she was going to pull through or not, she returns to normal. She returns to visibility. And her mental state returns to normal as well. So this really gets Sebastian kind of keyed up to decide that when he's presenting their current findings to the Pentagon, he decides he doesn't want to tell them about what he did recently accomplish. Now, this goes against the original plan of Elizabeth Shue, who's Linda, and her new boyfriend, which is another person on their team, played by Josh Brolin. His name is Matt. They're really frustrated, but what Sebastian's plan is that he's going to test this on himself. He feels confident enough to where he'll be able to go invisible and he'll be able to be brought back. And they're not really approved to do this. Human testing is not something that gets done on a whim. Even though some scientists will do it on a whim, it's not usually something that the government or that any... it takes a lot of red tape to clear. Well, he goes ahead and takes the invisibility serum and it reacts very poorly at first on his system, but then once he goes invisible, he stabilizes again. However, as I mentioned, he's a bit of a voyeur. So the very first thing he decides to do is to kind of grope one of the team members that's staying there overnight to watch him while she sleeps. So you can already see that he's testing the limits of what he can get away with while being invisible. It's also implied that he watches one of the other women going to the bathroom. He's listening in on their conversations about him when they don't realize that he's there. Later, he becomes frustrated with being cooped up in the place, so he decides to leave the lab and he goes home. He sees the girl across the street and decides that he wants to go into her place, watch her dry herself off from being, after taking her shower. He ends up attacking her and raping her. So his mental stability at this point, it's really kind of hard to tell whether or not he is going crazy or if he is testing his limits, because he is constantly talking about playing God and being a godlike figure because he's so brilliant with all of this molecular study and everything, but you don't really know whether or not he's growing unstable. Now, later on, he does become more and more aggressive. He becomes a little sneakier about sabotaging the cams that are watching him and so forth. And that eventually leads to him beginning to kill off the person who's hired him, who was a mentor of his when he was in school, that works for the government. He kills him off before any word can be passed along to the army that they're doing some things kind of unethically, so he decides to kill off the guy. He begins picking off the team members one by one until only Matt and Linda are left. And so it devolves. However, the question is that is he getting more and more used to being invisible and getting away with things, or is he really deteriorating from being invisible from what the serum does to him, which was true also in H.G. Wells' book too, that the serum, until it's counteracted, drives the subject more and more insane? Or is it a little bit of both? Was he already basically going to go down this path and go a little bit insane with power and with ability to kind of get away with this stuff? Because when you're not seen, how you can basically make it look like people have committed suicide. You can make people's testimony that they've been attacked sound crazy, sound like something that they're just unnerved by or whatever, and not really experiencing for real. And as he even states later, you'd be surprised what you'd be willing and able to do when you don't look at yourself when you can't see yourself in the mirror. So it's a little bit of a combination of, what I landed on was that, one, he was going a little bit insane, but he was also really loving the ability and the things that he could do when nobody can really see him. He really truly does become a hollow man, and he was already one to begin with. He was arrogant. He couldn't connect with people. He couldn't keep his girlfriend. He was a voyeur. He was full of himself. So he was already kind of a person who was lacking a lot of soul and a lot of personality to begin with. He just ends up becoming literally a hollow man by the end of this movie. So let's get to my three things that I like about this movie. First and foremost, the premise I think is interesting because I think it does fit the 2000 era that this came out. This movie came out during a time in which a lot of sci-fi movies were kind of going down a horror angle. There's this idea of a team of scientists. They're all working on this thing. They end up basically being trapped by a monster. It was something that was seen in movies like Event Horizon just a few years before this. So it really does kind of start off as a slightly different movie. It's a little bit more of a thriller. It's a little bit more of a science fiction movie, but then during the last act, that's when it kind of turns up the horror. But the premise of it, you do see the original Invisible Man story in there, and it does make for at least a compelling enough movie to where, even though this movie is not super well liked by a lot of people, it's at least something that is interesting to watch. And that leads directly into number two, and this is the Paul Verhoeven effect, I think. And this is the idea that there is a theme that runs through the underneath of this movie of voyeurism, and the idea of what would you be willing to do if you can get away with it? If nobody knew you were in a room, would you go and mess with people? Would you just use it to gather information? hear what people are saying about you. Would you do something perverted? Would you do something, would you assault people or grope people as they sleep? It's one of the things about what makes the Invisible Man story so compelling is the fact that when nobody can see you and nobody can directly defend against you, what is it that you think you can get away with? And for, a lot of what the original Invisible Man movie from Universal talked about is he wanted to rule the world. And you begin to feel invincible when you do feel like you can get away with everything. And so that becomes a very interesting concept. And there is something that, while I don't know that Paul Verhoeven goes far enough with this, and maybe after not so great box office success from both Starship Troopers and Showgirls, maybe he wasn't going to be allowed to get away with more of that deconstruction of that idea. But there is something there that is at the very least compelling, and something that's worth definitely really kind of diving into the ethical questions behind this. Also, there is an ethical question of whether or not they should even be testing the stuff on humans or on a human, and that's a whole scientific ethics that you can get into as well. And then thirdly, the special effects for this movie is actually pretty great for the year 2000, particularly around the Invisible Man. I kind of chuckled a little bit because there is an explosion because Kane decides to blow up the laboratory and then escape into the night. Nobody will know what happened to him. They will assume that he died, and he will go on and carry out whatever it is that he thinks he'll be able to get away with. But when the explosion happens, this is the infancy of that computer-generated fire, and it looks so fakey. And that looks so fake, but while that looked fake, there were things that were going on in this movie that looks so damn good, with particularly when he is disappearing, or when something disappears and then reappears, and it comes back in layers. It begins with veins, and then you start seeing bones, and then you start seeing the musculature, and then you start seeing the skin, and then it goes in reverse as something disappears from the serum. So that is really, really good special effects. They end up making a latex mask for Kevin Bacon to wear in this, and so he's wearing that a lot, but when he's not wearing sunglasses, or when he has his mouth open wide enough, it's a hollowed out mask, and it looks very real, and it's very well done. And then there's a point in which he's drowning his old mentor in his pool, and he's swimming underwater with the guy, and that whole effect of him, of this invisible person being able to be seen through the water, was really, really cool too. Those effects ended up getting this movie an Oscar nomination, and it's well worth it. It's a really cool effect that it does, and it really makes for a pretty neat experience to at least see those scenes in which somebody is disappearing and reappearing. So that wraps up this week's Monster Mondays. Now, don't forget to check out new episodes of Film Seizure every Wednesday, and a new installment of Monster Mondays each Monday on filmseizure.com, as well as places where you can find podcasts like SoundCloud, Apple, Google Podcasts, Stitcher, TuneIn, Spotify. We're even now on Audible that you can listen to through Amazon. You don't even need an account or pay or anything for that. But additionally, make sure that you go over to Facebook and Twitter, and you can follow us by just searching for Film Seizure. And while you're at it, head on over to www.bmovieanima.com and read new text articles each and every Friday from me. And you can also go over to YouTube, search for B Movie Anima, and you will find where I post not only clips of movies that I use in my articles, but also where you'll find B Movie Anima, the series, which was getting right from January 2nd to March 27th of this year. I did new episodes every Saturday there. That was the first season. Season number 2 is coming later in the year, so be sure to check that out. But you can watch a full movie there on my YouTube channel, B Movie Enema. So until next week, everybody, stay spooky.